And my name is Mike Griever, and our speaker for today is Dr. Tim Berra. He earned his PhD in biology at Tulane University in 1969. He has been a professor of ecology, organismal biology at The Ohio State University, and he's had some very interesting experiences I'm looking forward to hearing about. He was a university professional fellow at the Charles Darwin University in the Northern Territory of Australia. He also was a research associate at the Northern Territory Museum in Australia, in Darwin. He's been a three-time winner of a Fulbright Fellowship to Australia in 1969, 79, and 2009. He was the recipient of the Friend of Darwin Award from the National Center for Science Education in the year 2022. He also was the National Science Foundation Visiting Scholar at the University of Guam in 2023. So he's had some really very interesting experiences that I hope he'll share with us. He's also an author of over 100 scientific papers and 10 books, including one, The Peopling of Polynesia from Taiwan to Easter Island. And it's my understanding that the publication is this month, and that tonight's topic will be the peopling of Polynesia from Taiwan to Easter Island. And there will be a special edition of a numbered copies available for sale and signing at the reception after this lecture. So I think this is an exciting topic and an exciting lecturer. And I really appreciate the fact that there's been such a great turnout, because this is the beginning of this academic year. So thank you for coming. And Dr. Berra, thank you for giving us this lecture. Let me get out of the way here.
Okay, am I on? You can hear that now? Everybody okay? Very good. Well, we're going off to Polynesia. It's a long way to go. So fasten your seatbelts. Be advised that no matter how much I've cut out of this talk, I can't get it down to under 70 minutes. So, pull up your Pampers and fasten your seatbelt, and we're off and running here. I want to acknowledge the OSU Emeritus Academy, because I've been here for 50 years. I took early retirement in 95, and I'm still here. I'm part of this first class of the Emeritus Academy, and it's a wonderful thing. It gives people like me, who are total failures at retirement, the opportunity to keep going well past our use-by date. So here we go. We're off to Polynesia. You're going to see this map now, and you're going to see it at the end of the talk. We learn by repetition. Of course, if you get the book and read about it, you'll learn even more that you have forgotten from the lecture. So we're going to start in Taiwan, 5,000 years ago, moving along through the Philippines by 4,000 years ago, kind of bouncing around these islands along the coast of New Guinea, but not entering. New Guinea has been occupied by people for 40,000 years. They're not going to admit these migrants, except maybe as their dinner. And then they keep going through the Bismarck Archipelago, through the Solomon Islands. There's a big ocean gap here of maybe 380 kilometers, something like that. Islands are no longer within sight of one another. It's a major thing to cross. Everything to the west, to the west or left of that is known as near Oceania. Everything to the right or east is remote Oceania. No people. This is uninhabited territory from here on out. So our migrants are moving along. They get into New Caledonia 3,200 years ago, into Fiji 3,000 years ago, into Tonga and Samoa 2,800 years ago, and they stop. They stopped for 1,500 years. This is the beginning of Polynesia, Tonga and Samoa. And they hold up there for 1,500 years. Well, about 1,100 years ago, off some migrants go into East Central Polynesia. Whoa. And that is the sort of classical area where when you think of Polynesia, you get these romantic pictures of, coral beaches and volcanoes and palm trees and so forth. So 1,100 years ago into this area, Tahiti and so forth. Eventually, by 1,000 years ago, up to the Hawaiian Islands. 900 years ago, over to Easter Island. And 800 years ago to New Zealand, the last place on Earth to be occupied. That's the summary of this book. So we've had a little preview of who were these people, where did they come from, how and when did they get here. We're going to look at evidence from linguistics, archaeology, and biology. Here is a map of Oceania. Polynesia is this giant swath of the Pacific. If you take a line from Hawaii to Easter Island to New Zealand and back to Hawaii, you've inscribed Polynesia on the surface of the globe. This is a huge area. The people of Polynesia represent a phylogenetic group. They are united by their language, their culture, and their biology. Unlike the Melanesians and the Micronesians. Now, Nesia means island. Polynesia, many islands. Micronesia, small islands. Melanesia, dark islands, which is a reference to skin color. Here are some Melanesian children from the Trobriand Islands. Here is a group of girls from central Polynesia. This is a Micronesian lady from Guam. And the two areas, Melanesia and Micronesia, are geographical regions, whereas Polynesia is a coherent group of people. Now, there's another line to talk about in the Pacific, the andesite line. Everything to the west of that line is continental rock. For example, New Zealand is west of the andesite line. It's part of the Australia-New Guinea continent. But all of the islands to the east of that, those are formed either by volcanoes coming up from underneath or limestone from coral that are precipitating this and making little islands all along the area. So very different geological situations on either side of the andesite line. The Austronesian language is a giant language group of at least 1,000 languages spread all the way from Taiwan to Madagascar to Easter Island to New Zealand. A huge part of the earth speaks some form of Austronesian languages. These are tropical and subtropical people. They move around on boats. They're agriculturalists, and they are a coherent language group, as opposed to the non-Austronesian speakers, the Papuans. This non-Austronesian languages all over New Guinea. I lived and taught in New Guinea. I taught genetics and evolution to kids one generation out of the Stone Age before I came to Ohio State. My 1971 was entirely in Papua New Guinea. There are 800 languages in Papua New Guinea. Every village on every different side of the mountain speaks a different language. They can't talk to one another. They can't understand each other. All they can do is fight and kill each other. There are hundreds of mutually unintelligible languages. Australian Aboriginal languages, 260 of these, and they really have nothing to do with what we're talking about here. Here is the map of the language groups. All of these in blue, all these islands in Polynesia here are all speaking a form of oceanic Austronesian. But there are other forms of Austronesian languages indicated by these colors, the red, the orange, the yellow, the green. This brown here in New Guinea, This is the non-Austronesian group, the Papuan group. Linguists study words the way zoologists might study species. They look at similarities and differences. Here you have some common words that people on islands might use all the time, and look at the word for fish is so similar in all of these Polynesian languages, and even in Fiji, a Melanesian form of Oceanic Austronesian. All these other words, the similarities are very striking. The spread of the Austronesian language was extremely rapid. The distance from the Philippines to Western Polynesia there, to Tonga and Samoa, that's about 4,000 miles, but the language, the people, spread in about 1,200 years. And they spread in fits and starts, peaks. These colors are color-coded up here, and the spreading was based on the success of rice agriculture. People raised enough food, built up numbers, moved on to another island. And that's how the language spread. Lapita pottery is important in tracing the flow of people through Melanesia. The sherds of these bits and pieces of pottery form like a cookie crumb trail. You know, you follow it through Melanesia. The pots are called dentate, or tooth pots, meaning that they were, the soft clay was impressed with some sort of stylus or instrument, a tattoo instrument or a comb made out of tortoise shell, made little marks in it before the clay was fired and so forth. There are motifs on these pots. You can see the face there. These are faces that are upside down. These designs were geometric and symmetrical. The whole group was referred to colloquially as tattooed pots. Interesting thing is that this stops with Samoa. The Lapita people got into Samoa and stopped for 1,500 years. Lapita pottery stopped, did not go any further. What goes further to the east is known as Polynesian plainware. But the Lapita culture was far more than just the pottery. The adzes that they used for making dugout canoes are the same throughout all these islands. The fish hooks that are found in remains, all carved from shell in the same fashion. The housing was on stilts above the water, right at the, like the low tide line. The little carving instruments or choppers, these are used in butchery of things. Obsidian, volcanic glass, all the same throughout this culture of Lapita. The animals they had, the Pacific rats, chickens, pigs, and dogs that came with them. The crops, typical of the Polynesian crops, coconut, taro, breadfruit, and so forth. Here is a map of the Lapita culture as it moved down the Melanesian islands, getting into the Bismarcks around 3,500 years ago, into the Solomons about 3,200 years ago. Here's our boundary, our big ocean gap between near Oceania and remote Oceania. And then they cross that. All of this is unoccupied territory. It did not have people in it. New Caledonia about 3,200 years ago, 3,000 years ago into Fiji, finally into Tonga and Samoa by 2,800 years ago, and the migration of the Lapita people stops there for 1,500 years. The critters they brought with them, the Polynesian or Pacific rat, Rattus excellens. This is not the nasty rat that you see in the European ships that carry brown rats and Norway rats and black rats and so forth. This is Rattus excellens. It's a small little guy, and it was used as food. It couldn't swim, and it most likely was brought deliberately, but it could have been a stowaway also. It's found in the remains of all these ancient Polynesian sites, and you can actually use the rat DNA as the proxy for where humans moved. It's an important food item. Pigs, on the other hand, are a high status item used in ceremonies, celebrations, sacrifices, and so forth. Dogs were food items carried by the people. Now, the dogs came from Southern Asia, Eastern Asia. They were brought along, fed the same crops that the migrants were eating themselves, fattened up for the cooking pot. Captain Cook on his voyages was fed dog, and he said, tastes like lamb. The chicken is really a modification of the red jungle fowl, and it would come out of the jungles and start feeding on the rice grains that were building up in these villages because of successful agriculture. They were scooped up and brought with them. There are chickens everywhere throughout Polynesia, and you can learn some interesting things by looking at chicken DNA. For example, ancient chicken mitochondrial lineages from thousands of years ago are still alive today in the Solomons, Santa Cruz, Vanuatu, and Marquesas, the same genetic groupings. Chicken mitochondrial DNA from coastal Chile is identical to the early Polynesian sites, almost certainly reflecting the fact that the Polynesians got to South America and brought these chickens back with them. Now, another example of something like that is the sweet potato, a very important crop. This originated, it evolved in South America. It was brought by the Polynesians to various islands in Polynesia pre-European. This is pre-Columbian, 1,000 years ago. You find carbonized sweet potatoes on some of these islands. Not only did they bring the sweet potato, they brought the South American words for sweet potato, kumara. It's virtually the same as what the Peruvians call it. This is considered linguistic evidence of the connection between Polynesia and South America going in that direction. Another important use of the sweet potato is that it made colonization of New Zealand very likely and helpful because the tropical plants they had with them couldn't really make it. New Zealand is a cold, temperate area, not by Ohio standards, but it's still cold, and the tropical plants didn't make it. But sweet potato, having evolved in South America, was pre-adapted to being there. Breadfruit. This is a real interesting story. And you know about mutiny on the Bounty and so forth. Captain Bligh was charged by the king to go to Tahiti, bring back a bunch of seedling breadfruit trees, take them to the Caribbean and plant them so that there could be food for the slaves in the sugar plantations. Well, Fletcher Christian, his mate, had other ideas, and they liked Tahiti. They liked the women of Tahiti. They didn't want to leave. So they tossed off Captain Bligh into his own boat and he had to sail thousands of miles in an open boat to survive, whereas they took the Bounty. Well, here's the breadfruit. It's a beautiful tree, very shiny leaves, big fruit, like a watermelon size almost. The way you eat it, and this is very nice, I liked it. You pluck off the fruit, you put it in an earth oven and cook the heck out of it. You carbonize the shell, and then it looks like a bowling ball. You break off the shell, and inside is the fruit, the bread of the breadfruit. And what we did was we kind of smushed it down with our palms and poured coconut milk over it with some peppers chopped up in it, and that was really quite nice. Other parts of their diet included taro. The leaf of taro is used as a vegetable. The stem is a swollen stem underground, like a tuber or like a potato. Very carbohydrate rich with some protein. Important crop. Pandanus, our screw pine. The nuts are edible, you cook them up, but the leaves are vitally important in the sense that they were woven into a mat. That mat could cover the floor of your hut or make a wall or whatever, but even more importantly, was made into sails for the dugout canoes. That changed life completely. And of course, the coconut is the ubiquitous Swiss Army knife of plants. Other things, bananas were brought, paper mulberry, kava, a pepper plant, was used and made into a mild kind of narcotic beverage, a social libation. Oh, it's 5 o'clock. It's time for kava, and 5 o'clock somewhere. The way that Polynesia got populated has been broken down into several models. One is called the express train. And what that refers to is that the Southeast Asian migrants came down out of Taiwan, through the islands, passed right through the Melanesian islands and on to Tonga and Samoa with very little interaction with the Melanesians. The other three models are similar to one another, but different from the express train. Slow boat, triple I, which stands for intrusion, innovation, and integration, and entangled bank, all involve greater and greater interactions of the migrants with the Melanesians. And these models all refer to the amount, the degree of interaction, not the speed of this interaction. Ancient DNA evidence shows that the Lapita people who made this migration became the first remote Oceanians. They got past admixture here. And that was the Melanesian genes getting into the Polynesian gene pool, but only after several centuries after the Lapita people ended up in Samoa. There was no linguistic transfer. Movement to the east brought these Melanesian genes, and then there was back migration, the Polynesians moving back into Melanesia, and this is a classic example of the entangled bank business, people going back and forth. Now, I need to point out that the data, the answers you get from linguistics, archaeology, and genetics do not always give you the same answer. And you have to almost be an expert in those fields to know what you can trust and what you can't. It's not as simple as just taking it at face value. So the Lapita people had not mixed with the Papuan speaking people 2,800 years ago when they got to Samoa. However, today's Polynesians contain about 25% of their genes from Papuans. Both of those are correct statements. Therefore, there is the Melanesian component was acquired after this original migration. It was the later expansion of populations to the east that brought this Papuan ancestry around 3,200, 3,500 years ago, or sorry, 2,300, 2,500 years ago from the Bismarck Archipelago. This is an interesting point here. The original Lapita genotype that we found up in Taiwan, that it was moving along through the islands, that genotype no longer exists in Polynesia, except when it's admixed with the Papuan genes. And that's what we have today. Now, all this bouncing around islands requires some kind of an ocean-going vessel. Well, the simplest watercraft is something that floats like a log. So you sit on the log and you can drift around. However, if your technology includes an as, you can start chiseling that out from the inside and making a dugout canoe. That gives you more flexibility to go out on the reef and fish. Put a little paddle behind it, you can steer it, you can make it go in a certain direction. That's giving you more food, better nutrition. If you put a sail up made of pandanus, oh my, you can get outside the reef. You can fish for tuna. You can also make your dugout much more stable by adding a second hull and outrigger. You strap that with some lashings you made out of coconut fiber called senet. You rub that together into a rope. You've made much more stable canoe, which can go further afield. You can start fishing for tuna on the outside of the reef. Eventually, a double hull canoe evolved from all of this. These are very large ocean-going crafts, 70 feet long, 20 feet wide. They had a little hut on there. You carry all the animals, carry 20 people, carry bamboo shafts of fresh water. This is what allowed the Polynesians to get into central Polynesia and then up to Hawaii and all over the place. They really had to wait for the development of that. And this is part of this 1,500-year halting in Samoa. During this time, not only did they develop this Vako Moana, the name of that ocean-going canoe, but they developed incredible navigation skills. And this would take hours to explain everything they could do. And you really have to understand navigation to do it. But they were able to use their hands to calculate latitude and star maps. They could detect current with their hands in the water, how the water was moving and zipping around. They used the biology of the sea creatures, like frigate birds. They knew that frigate birds didn't go more than 100 miles from land to feed their chicks, come back. Whereas noddies and other smaller birds didn't go nearly as far. They might go 30 miles. So you see a frigate bird up there, you say, well, there's land somewhere, in relative distance. They looked at things like cloud formations. The islands are so small and flat, they don't stand up. 50 miles away, you're not going to see a coral island. But you can see the cloud that's over the coral. And that cloud may have a little blue patch or ring on the belly of the cloud. That's actually the reflection of the lagoon of the island. Pretty nifty. You see a lagoon on a cloud. Let's go over there. These are things that made the footprint of a tiny island much larger and would make landfall more likely. Bioluminescence, the stirring up of the dinoflagellates that give off light and so forth. All these things were clues for these ancient navigators. Now we're going to go into West Polynesia. I've outlined that in red, mainly Tonga and Samoa, but there's a bunch of little islands in there too. Tonga is west of the andesite line. There's a huge ocean trench there. The Tonga Trench, 32,000 feet deep. This is caused by the subduction of one plate under the other and so forth. All this was uninhabited area. People got to Tonga 2,900 years ago. There were no people there. Those that got there did form a stratified society ruled by kings, and they conquered territories of neighboring islands. They intermarried. They held on to the land they conquered. This is a stratified society. That Captain Cook landed in 1774. He was welcomed, he appreciated his hospitality, and really liked the place and named them the Friendly Islands. Little did he know that the king was plotting to kill Cook and take the ships, but it didn't quite happen. The Kingdom of Tonga is the only surviving kingdom in Polynesia today. Moving on to Samoa, 2,800 years ago, on the other side of the andesite line. It's not continental rock. The society formed by the Samoans was very different. It wasn't nearly as stratified. You could advance by achievement. What you did mattered rather than who you were related to. Because of the proximity of Fiji to Tonga and Samoa, there's a lot of interaction here, and they move back and forth, even though one's in Melanesia, the other's in Polynesia. Kava drinking, very prominent in Fiji, spread to Tonga and Samoa. So they're big into that, whereas that did not happen in the more eastern parts of Polynesia. Tonga, or Samoa rather, likely served as the staging area for getting to the central islands of Polynesia. But before we go there, let's go to what are called the Polynesian outliers. These are 18 islands, 2 of which are in Micronesia, the other 16 in Melanesia. They're called Polynesian outliers because the culture is Polynesian. The language is Polynesian. These are basically part of Polynesia, but geographically not part of Polynesia. They're part of Melanesia and Micronesia. So they're referred to as the Polynesian outliers. Lapita pottery is there, and there was movement back and forth between Polynesia and these islands. This is part of the entangled bank business. Okay, going off to the east now. We're getting into the central area, which is the sort of the romantic idea of Polynesia. When you think of the sandy beach and the palm tree and the volcanoes in the background and the mountains, Tahiti and Bora Bora and all that. This is the part of Polynesia you're talking about. It's certainly the hub from which these outliers like Hawaii, Easter Island, and New Zealand were populated. This happened around 1100 years ago. The culture in Polynesia is common throughout all of these islands. They all built these altars called mare, and these were large, like plateaus of stone where village ceremonies were done, dancing and sacrifices and so forth. And there were also terraced piles of stone that had various artwork with them and so forth. The people of these areas were highly decorated with tattoos. This fellow from the Marquesa, I mean, there's not an undecorated part of his skin, and it's kind of beautiful in a way. He doesn't need clothing. He's got all the decoration he needs. When you go into Papeete, the capital of Tahiti, you can find hundreds of tattoo shops that'll do that for you. And, it just looks better there than it does here, I think. The other things they do, they make stone statues. Now we're going to go to Easter Island eventually, Rapa Nui, and you know about the moai, these gigantic statues. Well, that just didn't spring up out of nowhere. It had to come from somewhere. It came from this culture of making stone carvings of tikis and so forth. Tahitian society that farmed was also highly structured. They had chiefs, landowners, commoners, and slaves. The slaves were people conquered in battle, brought to the island, and they did the labor. The Pacific anthropologist Peter Bellwood referred to Tahitian society as savage magnificence. Here's a view of Hawaii you don't see every day. I like this map because it shows the real Hawaii. There's a lot more to Hawaii than the few islands that we know about. There's all of this. Hawaii is the largest archipelago in Polynesia. The land area makes up 5.5%. It's the most isolated archipelago on Earth. These islands formed over this volcanic hotspot in the east. The plate that the islands are on has been moving over that hotspot. So the islands get older and older and older the further away from the hotspot. So Kuri, the most northeast of the island, is 25 million years old, whereas the big island Hawaii, if you watch the news, just last week it was erupting. It's making more island. It's still growing. It's only 700,000 years old. So it's still under construction. The settlers who finally got here about 1,000 years ago ended up first in Kauai and Oahu. And then as the populations build up, they moved out into other islands. And it eventually became a lot of warfare because there was no unification each island had its own chief and king, and they wanted to unite the next island and the next island, and they fought and fought and fought. This went on for a long time, and we'll get to the unification in a minute. The Hawaiians did some interesting things. Their culture was really highly stratified. Probably the most stratification of any Polynesian island is in Hawaii. They had deified kings. They did things like take dry fields, irrigate them, and build rock walls around them so that they were flooded fields, which was great for planting taro. Their agriculture thrived. The number of people could increase. They made fish ponds out of closing up with rock embayments of the sea. They could raise mullet and milkfish and catch them whenever they wanted. The population grew and grew as these clever cultural things took root, and 250,000 to 1 million Hawaiians. It's hard to pin down that number. Captain Cook arrived in 1779 and found what was described as a pristine state. Pristine because this had evolved in complete isolation. No other peoples had anything to do with this, yet they spread themselves out with a divine kingship, class distinctions, royal control of food and all the prestige goods, and so forth. This kind of society had only arisen a few times in human history, in Mesopotamia, in the Nile Valley, in the Yellow River of China, and Mesoamerica. The Hawaiians had a lot going on for themselves. When Captain Cook arrived on his third voyage, he had 3 voyages throughout the South Pacific, and that's a whole other great story in itself. I recommend you read about all that. But he was welcomed as a god on his first arrival in Hawaii. The calendar was predisposed to that happening among the Hawaiians. He was treated as a god, given all these incredible gifts. Women were sent to the ships and stayed overnight, and everybody was having a good time. Parties on land, parties on the sea, and it was just great. He had to finally sail away. He had 2 ships with him, sailed away for about a week, ran into a storm. One of the ships had a broken mast. They had to come back. Well, the Hawaiian calendar had changed by then. It was now the time of war. Cook was no longer a god. They resented this intrusion of him coming back. Some people grabbed his longboat and kept it. Well, Cook wasn't going to stand for that. He wanted his boat back. So he took the king, held the king hostage. Big mistake. Cook was hacked to death on the reef on Valentine's Day in 1779. Little bits and pieces of Captain Cook were all over the reef. It wasn't until 1810 that King Kamehameha united all of the Hawaiian islands, the ones that we know about, 7 or 8, not the ones that were so distant. They all became part of his kingdom, and this was brought about by all kinds of Machiavellian maneuverings. It's a big deal to study that. His offspring, Kamehameha II, and then Kamehameha III, carried all this on. And if you drive around Honolulu, there's Kamehameha everything, streets, roads, valleys, mountains, hills, everything is named after him. Finally, with all this kingdom being visited by American businessmen, European businessmen, this brought all kinds of horrible things to Hawaii, like missionaries. The Western concept of land ownership. This caused great problems for Hawaii, and eventually the last Hawaiian monarch, Queen Liliuokalani, was deposed in 1893 by American businessmen who wanted to plant sugarcane and pineapples and so forth. Hawaii was annexed as a territory in 1898, and many of us in this age group remember statehood for Hawaii, 1959. Now we're going to Easter Island, Rapa Nui in Polynesian. It's near nowhere. I mean, Its closest island neighbor is Pitcairn Island. That's where the Bounty ended up. That's where Fletcher Christian, ran the Bounty ashore and burned it down. And they figured they'd never be found by the Admiralty there. It's 3,700 kilometers away from Chile. It's extremely remote. Here's a map of Easter Island. It's about 14 miles across, 8 miles deep, formed by 3 volcanoes. One in the west, the big volcanic lake here, the fresh water that made colonization possible. There's fresh water. This is an important village here. It's a ceremonial village, Orongo, and I'm going to tell you more about that and birdmen. There's some little islands off the coast. They figure in the birdman business. We'll get there. One village on the island, Angaroa. There's an airfield. This is where you fly in. You fly to Concepcion, to Santiago, Chile, then wait around, and if you're lucky, you can find a flight to Easter Island. It doesn't go every day. You got to make all these bookings very carefully and coordinate it with your lodging on Easter Island. It's not easy to do. But anyway, you fly into that airport. That airport is huge in the sense of length. It was expanded by NASA in case the space shuttle needs to make an emergency landing in the South Pacific. It heads for Rapa Nui, glides down, and can land there. So the volcanoes in the center and then in the east, those 3 volcanoes flowed together and formed this island. This volcano is extremely important. The one in the east, that's the quarry. All the moai are carved from there, but yet look where they are. They're all over the island, all along the coast. Their backs are always to the sea. They faced inland to watch over their villages, but they have their birth here in this volcanic quarry. This is what we're going to talk about next. The vertical ones here are the ones that have been restored, re-erected. All the little dots are other bits and pieces of moai that need to be lifted up and placed on their altars and restored. There's a lot of work to do yet. Here is the first one that was restored in 1955 by Thor Heyerdahl, the Norwegian anthropologist, the author of Kon-Tiki, who got everything all wrong but had this wonderful adventure on the raft. This fellow has his eyes open. All of the statues are carved with eye sockets, but not many of them have actual eyes inserted in them. There were some that did. That limestone, the white, comes from the sea, from the coral, and then volcanic obsidian is used as the pupil. And many of them have little top notches, or pakua. And this, you note, is red. The volcanic tuft is the gray kind of ash of the volcano. This has got a lot of iron oxide in it. The mining of the rock for the headpiece is in the west. The mining or the carving of the statue is in the east, but they had to come together. This is, the incredible maneuvering of the people to move these things. Now, here's the slope of the volcano where they're carved from. They're not just heads. And I have a moai over here. I brought one. He's on the table with a couple lays around him. I just had to have one. You can buy them as ornamental pieces from garden places. Well, these guys are not just heads. They're full torsos. If you excavate all around these guys, you will find this. This is a Thor Heyerdahl excavation from the 50s. If every, just to assign a value, let's say each man is 6 foot, 1, 2, 3 layers, that's 18 feet of depth. All of these statues have arms that go all the way down under their belly. You're only seeing the top part because of erosion from that slope. Here's the largest moai ever carved. It's way too big to have ever been erected. It's just left in place. 69 feet long. The head itself is 23 feet. The weight, 222,000 pounds. How are you ever going to erect that? So there he lies. Now, this is a neat figure that shows you the scale of these statues. They're incredible. This little short one, see, he's kneeling. It's the only kneeling moai. But even so, it would take a couple people standing on each other's shoulders to get to his top. And these other guys are enormous. And by the time you're here, just look at how many people would have to stand on each other's shoulders to get to the top. And here is our, our giant who's still laying down. All of these statues are named and numbered. Here is the kneeling moai. It's the only one like that. It's the only moai with a butt. And he has his hands there on his knees, and you can walk around him and have a good look at him. Carving of these things is done like this, from a slab. You carve the front first. There's the head and the chin and the ears and the arms going down and the chest. To separate him from the bedrock, you have to burrow into this keel that's holding it up. So you pick out the holes with basaltic tools, which are more resistant than the volcanic tuff that you're carving into. You then lay a bunch of stones and gravel under him so that when you finally separate it from the bedrock, it doesn't come crashing down flat. You can raise him, put a rope around the head, pull him upright into the ditch or trough that you have dug. Moving these things. How do you do that? Well, there's a bunch of different ways, but they all seem to involve this gigantic palm from Rapa Nui, the oldest palm to have ever lived, the biggest in diameter to have ever lived. And it's now extinct because it was cut down to extinction, deforestation of the palm. This may have been what precipitated the collapse of Easter Island population. We'll look at that in a minute. But here are some ways of moving the moai. With a palm log, you tie him up and drag him along. You know, those ropes are all made from palm fibers and leaves and so forth. Palms involved in everything. Here's a scaffolding kind of situation where you can suspend him and drag him along. Moving like you'd move a refrigerator or a file cabinet, left, right, a few inches at a time, you eventually get it to where you want it to go. Labor intensive, but can be done. This is a neat little vehicle. Logs formed rollers, logs from the palm tree making the sled. You drag them along, inch by inch. You get there. Somebody's running ahead, maybe putting more palm logs in front as you keep pulling. This is an interesting find. There are roads that the locals made in prehistory, and you can see these from satellites. Some of them have signs that there were tracks, like a railroad made of the palm logs, and people can push the moai along that. Here is kind of lift and pull, getting them to move. The photograph on the right is some of Thor Heyerdahl's people demonstrating a proof of concept by actually moving heavy concrete-made moai. They didn't want to damage the real one, so they made their own of the right weight and size, and they are able to move them with all these traditional ways. I might point out that number 3 up here is known as the statues that walk, and there's an important book about that. And if you look online, you will see people pulling ropes on either side of a moai, moving him down the road. It's pretty cool. Now, the moai were all placed on altars. They all were attached to their ahu. The ahus were enormous rock structures, huge courtyards in the village, which went up to a pinnacle, many feet tall, 30, 40 feet. And the statue's on top of that. And on top of the statue is a pakua. All this was done without any kind of machinery, just labor. All of these ahu, the 313 of them, are parallel to the shore. The moai always have their backs to the water. Here's a restored Ahu, this is Ahu. Now, all these things are named. You can drive to these or ride a horse to these or hike to them. It's a great place to visit, but it takes a lot of planning. These guys have their pacus on top. How did they get up there? Well, being pushed up a palm log is one way. If you lubricate that palm log with squash bananas or sweet potatoes or banana leaves, you can reduce the friction and help move it. All the moai seem to be males. There are a couple that have some sexually dimorphic features, and you might want to call them female. This, breast and vulva and so forth, and they look a bit different. This one is in the museum. It's the only one I saw. I'm told there are 9 others somewhere in the volcano that I couldn't get to. This was found in 2 pieces by Thor Heyerdahl's excavations along a beach, 30 years apart, and united at the museum finally. This is the largest ahu with 15 moai attached. This thing is enormous. It's 2 football fields of ahu. If you walk around it, which I did, say start here, go all the way to the back and all the way around, you've walked 4 football fields. That's something to do in the heat of the tropics. You can look at the back of them. Some of them have carvings on the back. They were all reconstructed in 1990 as part of this program of restoring the moai. The tallest one here is 29 feet tall. I'm way, way far back with a telephoto lens to get all of these in and still have them big enough to see. You can stand on the slope of the volcano where they were carved, look out to sea, and see this little tiny moai with the sea behind them. They're that big and visible, you can see them from the quarry. If you're a chicken, you live in a chicken coop made of rock, and they're huge. There are 1,200 of these things all over the island. There are a couple openings. You push your chooks in there at night to keep them safe from being stolen. During the daytime, you roll that rock away and let the chooks come out and peck around the grass. If you're a human, you live in a type of house as a boathouse. It's the common name for it because it looks like a house turned upside down. But it has a stone foundation. There are holes in that stone. Branches are stuck in there and bent over to the other side where the branch is put into the other side's hole of the stone. And then a lattice work is formed, which is covered with thatch. People sleep lengthwise in there communally. And there are lots of these all over the place too. Lots of carvings on the rocks. And since it's an island, you get a lot of marine creatures. 165 petroglyphs of sea creatures. 481 of birdmen, and I'll show you a birdman carving, but they're all very similar, and the number of them indicates how important that is in their culture. Now, here's something new, publications going on right now as we speak, and it's very important. These are gardens. They make containerized gardens. These circular gardens formed by rock, because the ground is so rocky, you can't just plow and plant. You have to pick up the rocks. You make this circular container inside of which you plant sugarcane or bananas or taro or whatever you want. And these gardens are different sizes. Some of them, this is a short one, maybe 18 inches tall. Some of them are 2 meters tall, 6 feet or more, inside of which you plant the plant and then cover what passes for soil with more rock. You use the rock as a mulch. It's called lithic mulch. The rock on the outside, the container, protects it from the sea breeze, from erosion, from damage by high winds. The rock over the soil holds the moisture in. As the rock is decomposed by rain and erosion and so forth, it puts its minerals into the soil and therefore into the plant. This is a really cool type of agriculture. It's how the people coped. Now, why this is important today is that Anthropologists, archaeologists are looking at these from satellites with special lasers and instruments that allegedly detect these gardens on the surface or slightly buried below the surface. You can then count the number of these gardens. You can extrapolate the surface area of the garden. From that, you can calculate the amount of calories that could be produced. From that, you can extrapolate the population numbers. This is what's important. And new papers are coming out all the time now, changing this paradigm that I talked about of ecocide caused by deforestation from the denuding of these palm trees to something else. And it's this something else that the gardens are involved in. Now, here's a quick look at the palm, largest palm tree that ever lived, the Rapa Nui palm. This is the one from Chile, which is similar. They're gone. The Rapa Nui ones are gone. They're extinct. There's no native tree in Rapa Nui taller than 10 feet because everything was wiped out. Once the palms were gone, all the other trees were cut down. There was no wood left for fires or canoes or anything. This is all part of the collapse of society in one way of looking at it. Civil disturbance, 1500 to 1700, statues were toppled over in all of this fighting. This is part of the ecocide that one wants to say is due to deforestation, resulting in agricultural failure, tribal fighting, cannibalism, society breakdown, and the population actually crashing to 110 people in 1877. This is by actual census. The comments of Captain Cook in 1774 reported that there were quite a lot of overturned moai when he visited. Some were still upright. By 1838, there was one moai left standing. So we have ecocide having to do with the slash and burn agriculture, deforestation. Jared Diamond popularized this in his book, Collapse. It's a terrific book. It's about the failure of all kinds of societies all throughout the earth. His chapter on Easter Island is where this ecocide is promoted, and this is what most people know. He says the population crashed from anywhere from 10,000 to 20,000 people down to what we know of 110 individuals. Okay, that's the prevailing view. Papers are now coming out, spearheaded by Hunt and Lepo, 2012. Their book, The Statue That Walked. This is saying, wait a minute, we have some other things to say here. We don't think the population ever got anywhere near that 10 to 20,000. We think it topped out around 3,000. And the population did not crash due to blackbirding. Due to deforestation. It crashed because of blackbirding. That's the kidnapping of Rapa Nui, taking them to South America to work in guano mines in Peru. Slave labor, basically. A few of them actually were repatriated back to Rapa Nui. They brought back with them smallpox, tuberculosis. Natives had no protection against that, and their population crashed. So Hunt and Lepo and his colleagues, who, by the way, include the guide that I used in Easter Island, she was put as an author on their paper about these gardens now because she knows so much about the island. She's a native Rapa Nui lady, not a scientist, but she took Hunt and Lepo and the others to these gardens, and they're saying the white man did it. Don't blame the locals. This is a genocide, not an ecocide. So we're in this time of history of maybe a paradigm shift, maybe not. There's good evidence for both of these possibilities. And having read all of this, I'm kind of standing in the middle here saying, well, I think there's some synergism here, that the results of both of these things acting together synergistically was greater and more damaging than either one by itself. But, you know, who knows? We don't have the answer yet. What is this? This looks like some kind of writing. There's no writing in Oceania except what the Europeans brought when they got there. Writing arose independently in Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, and Mesoamerica. What is this? It's known as rongo-ronga. It's indecipherable. We don't know what it is. It's carved on wooden planks, and you know, I photographed this in the Bishop Museum. There are no pieces left on the island. The missionaries confiscated. There are 27 preserved pieces. There are replicas in the museum on Rapa Nui. It's on driftwood, which is probably from crashed ships, maybe 1,000 miles away, that rolled in. And somehow this got caught. We don't know. I'm just putting it there because it's weird, you know? Now, I apparently didn't say something I planned to say. I won't try and go back and find the slide, but there are 877 moai, and those things are not gods. They are ancestors. Those ancestors were powerful men in the village. So they had a lot of spiritual power known as mana. That mana is why the statues were built, to harness that, to look over the village and protect them. 877 moai, harvesting the mana. That's what carving them is all about. If you had a big important person in your village and he died, you built a big man. Now, if your village is fighting another village, you got to build a bigger moai than they have. It's that sort of thing that went on. Sorry, I skipped that slide. I don't know. I'm thinking so fast here to try and cover this. Here is the Birdman competition. It's like an Olympic event. Here's what a Birdman looks like. It's a Birdman. And there are hundreds of these on carvings all over the place. But what it is a competition. Each village selects its best young man athlete. He has to climb down that cliff of the volcano that has that mile in diameter lake in the west, climbs down that cliff, swims out to sea. Now that's 1,000-foot climb. He then has to swim nearly 2 miles out to Moai Nui. He hangs around out there until the sooty tern flies in to lay eggs. He sneaks up on the nesting tern, grabs a couple eggs, puts them on his forehead, sort of ties it up with a banana leaf or tapa cloth or whatever he makes, ties that onto his forehead, swims the 2 miles back to the cliff, climbs up the cliff, presents these undamaged eggs to the chiefs that are hanging around the Orongo village. He becomes Birdman for the year. That's the story. Here is that lake inside the volcanic crater. It's a mile across. The lip is beginning to erode and fall down. Climbing down that cliff to the sea, that's the climb the Birdman had to make. He had to get back to this village at Oronga. The chiefs were all waiting there. They're living in this little stone hut communally. Now, the Birdman competition produced a lot of friction because the hereditary chiefs didn't like the idea that these young guys got all of this prestige from this athletic event. This may have something to do with the fighting that took place among the different villages. Well, the moai continue to exert their mana, whether it's sunrise, sunset. It's just an amazing place. And I hope you can get there. It's really an unusual destination. Now here's a little moai humor I can assure you that the Stonehenge is really not the toes of the moai coming out the other end of the earth. The Keister Island, that's just in somebody's imagination. And then there's Easter Bunny Island, another clever play. We're going to the last place on Earth occupied. Hang on, we're almost at the end. New Zealand, the land of the low white cloud, Aotearoa in the Maori language. Last place on Earth to be occupied, 800 years ago. It was settled from the central islands that eventually got there, almost certainly from Rarotonga. Is the closest, most current favorable place. But this low white cloud may have served as sort of a beacon. You know, you're in your canoe and you see this very long cloud a great distance away. Let's go over there and see what that's all about. New Zealand makes up 89.5% of the Polynesian landmass. Hawaii, remember, was 5.5%. Add those two together, 95% of all Polynesia is either Hawaii or New Zealand. And New Zealand, by the way, is continental rock, part of the Australian continent. The first settlement on New Zealand took place up here in the north end of the South Island. And this was a mass migration. It wasn't an oddball canoe washing up. It was many, many big canoes. The mitochondrial DNA, which you only get from females, indicates that the founding population was somewhere around 200 females. Well, if there's 200 females, there's almost certainly 200 males, and whatever animals they brought with them, and so forth. That seems to be a well-planned mass migration. And this went on and on and on. It started 800 years ago. Well, 800 years ago is the year about, I'm taking liberties here, about 1200 CE. This went on to 1450 CE. For a couple hundred years, people went back and forth. New Zealand continued to get newcomers. The voyage was rigorous. It was no longer tropical voyaging. It was cold and water spray and so forth. Those that had a more robust morphotype, the Maoris that we see today, these are very robust people, not the more slender Polynesians who would lose their heat, body heat in such circumstances, but really robust people who would retain body heat. Whoops. This is a map of rat DNA, but it perfectly mimics human migration. The rats coming from Samoa, getting into central Polynesia, going off to Hawaii and back to central Polynesia, going off to Easter Island, going off to New Zealand, back to central Polynesia. This is rat DNA that is a proxy, a stand-in for human migration. They were with people all the time. The migrants, the Maoris, got to New Zealand with sweet potatoes. Their other tropical plants could not make it. Too cold in winter for these other plants. But sweet potato kept them going. The dog was with them, good food item, and New Zealand fur seals, excellent source of food. They were nearly wiped out by the settlers, almost hunted to extinction. Lots of wood in forests. New Zealand was highly forested, some very unusual plants, southern hemisphere, primitive kind of things. The kauri plant, magnificent tree, good for making canoes and used for carvings and housing and so forth. They wiped the forest down to 40% of what it used to be. Here is an interesting food source. This large flightless bird. There were about 11 species of these things. They're called moa. Moa is the Polynesian word for chicken, or moas if you want. Either one could be plural. Some of these birds, the biggest species, weighed 550 pounds. Their eggs were 15 pounds. What an omelet that would make. They were hunted to extinction within 200 years of the Maoris landing. They hunted and hunted and hunted until there were no more moa. How do we know how many moa there might have been? Well, if you look in the mittens all throughout New Zealand, you will find 160,000 skulls. That's telling you individuals. No animal has more than one skull. 160,000 individual moai were exterminated in the 200 years that people got there and then did this. Here is a neat diorama. This is near the campus of the University of Otago, where I was a professor. There's a real neat, cool story here. This young man was a medical student. His native name was Te Rangi Haroa. He went on to get his medical degree. He served in the Army Medical Corps. He became a very prominent anthropologist, studied his own people, the Maoris. He ended up as director of Bishop Museum, the most important Polynesian museum in the world. He lived in Honolulu 15 years. He wanted to become an American citizenship, so he applied. Distinguished record. He had been knighted by, I guess it would have been King George VI. This is Sir Peter Buck, his Western name. He wrote books under that name. Well, Sir Peter Buck applied for citizenship. He was denied. He was 50% Maori, 50% Caucasian. And to be granted citizenship, you had to be a minimum of 51% Caucasian. So he didn't get in. Carvings, important way for Maoris to express their stories and their life and their culture. This beautiful piece I brought back 50 plus years ago. You wouldn't find anything that nice today, I don't think. But here's another ancient, some of these are massive on their housing and so forth. Tongue sticking out. This is a gesture of the warrior. Here's a very robust Maori with his tongue sticking out, threatening whoever his enemy is. And if you ever watch a rugby game between the New Zealand team, they do the haka, which is this traditional dance where they're shaking the earth and sticking out the tongue. It's very impressive and intimidating. You got to see that to believe it. It's just a typical war dance, and other teams have started doing this. Some Hawaiian teams are trying to make this happen. The carvings, you see the fingers, there's 3. This stands for birth, life, and death. These swirls here are the top of a silver fern, another New Zealand symbol representing new growth. Tattooing is very important in New Zealand. Lots of artwork on people's bodies. So we end where we started. We learn by repetition. I want to whip through this one more time. Migrants, 5,000 years ago, leaving Taiwan. Their descendants keep moving on, get into the Philippines by 4,000 years ago. Their descendants keep marching on through the islands, along the coast of New Guinea. They don't intrude much because New Guinea had been occupied by people for 40,000 years. The original out of Africa movement of Homo sapiens ended up there 40,000 years ago. They continue to move, continue to move. Solomon Islands, 3,300 years ago. Here's this gap, big ocean barrier between remote Oceania in the west, near Oceania in the west, remote Oceania in the east. They finally crossed that 3,200 years ago, New Caledonia, Fiji, 3,000 years ago, Tonga, Samoa, 2,800 years ago, and they stop for 1,500 years. No migration out of there. There are no people in any of these areas in remote Oceania. They're the first people to get there. They stopped for 1,500 years. Lapita pottery stops there. This is the time they're developing these incredible navigational skills. They're building, eventually learning how to make a vaca moana. They're sailing around, getting better and better. And eventually, 1,100 years ago, they get out of Samoa into Central East Polynesia, more or less simultaneously. From there, it's up to Hawaii about 1,000 years ago, over to Easter Island, perhaps 900 years ago, and going on to South America by about 800 years ago. Down to New Zealand, 800 years ago, the last uninhabited place on Earth. We've just looked at the last human diaspora. Thank you for your attention. Books will be for sale in the back. I'm happy to sign them. It's a special edition. It's only available at this moment. After that, there's no more, but then the regular version will be there. I'm happy to take questions. Thank you. What do we got right here? Oh, yeah, see, that was the slide. I don't know what happened to that. I must have been thinking about the next slide and skipped over the one I wanted to say. But carving of a moai would depend on how big you wanted to make it. But it's thought that a crew of 12 or so could make a moai in 1 to 2 years, depending on its size. That's all they did. Carvers was a group. That's how they made their living. They were fed by others. You know, the fishermen, the farmers would feed the carvers to keep making the moai, you know. And then the movement, again, we don't know exactly how long it would have taken to move a statue 5 miles, 10 miles. That's an incredible piece of engineering. Yeah. Around, say, 1,500 years ago, something like that, when this civil disturbance got started. You know, they were instead destroying moai. They were knocking over each other's, because that would demoralize the people. Will knock over their moai, their source of manna. You know, and so then they tried to do it to yours. And this is all part of this civil unrest that led to a population collapse. Now, how much of that had to do with deforestation versus this new idea that the population was never very big and they did the best they could with what they had, but contact with Western men caused this problem. You know, that's the dilemma we find ourselves in, trying to interpret. More questions? Back.
So what's your opinion on the sweet potato debate?
On what?
Potato debate, the genetics data, not putting the sweet potato in Polynesia so much earlier than potentially.
I'm not really understanding.
I'm sorry. What is your opinion on the controversy about the sweet potato presence in Polynesia with the genetic data putting the sweet potato there so much earlier?
Okay.
Yep.
Now, see, I had that in the slide, but I didn't, part of my effort to save time, I didn't go through it because it's complicated and it's not all that satisfying. But the real experts in the sweet potato business say that the ancient DNA showing that sweet potato either got to Polynesia on its own or that was there before the people got there, that ancient DNA was in the early days of studying ancient DNA and was not properly handled. And they question the reliability of those data and basically don't accept them. So that is discounted, whereas the going and getting it and bringing it back with the word for sweet potato outweighs less than perfect DNA data that may have been contaminated. That's the answer. And I go into this in the book. So there's a lot more in the book. I have just tons of references citing all this science. And in trying to make it an hour lecture, I had to dump so much stuff. But I still never made the hour. But it's all in the book. How long did I go? Oh, yeah, that's about the 70 minutes I promised. Yeah. Okay. And I'm still talking. Yes.
Communities related to resources that were needed by one that the other area didn't have, lack of language, communication.
Yeah, it wasn't language, but resources were the thing. Because in the early days, before there was fighting, everything was copacetic. The statues had to be moved across everybody's territory. That was no problem. The island was kind of partitioned like a pie with wedge-shaped slices. The fat end of the wedge would be back by the sea, and then it all tapered to the front. So each village had a ceremonial chieftain. There were about 12 villages, but there was no problem supplying food throughout the island. The fishermen, the resources on the island are concentrated in a certain place. The fishing is all done on the northeastern coast. The quarrying is done at that one volcano. The agriculture is around the coast, but not very far inland. So there was different groups of people making their living and feeding each other by trade, and they kept the carvers in action, and they allowed the moai to be drug around their land and put in somebody else's land. That was happy. Getting to the point where there is friction now, fighting, food being withheld. We're not going to send food to the fishermen are not going to feed the carvers. The carvers are not going to make moai. You can't move the moai now because there are no more trees. The farmers aren't going to have, the fishermen aren't going to have logs to make canoes to go out and fish. All this is interrelated, and that is thought to be part of the evidence of this collapse due to ecocide. So there's a lot we need to know yet, and this is getting a lot of attention now by several groups, and they're competitive, and they're dealing with different hypotheses. So I'm not willing to say that that ecocide has a leg up over the genocide or vice versa. We just don't know yet. I got to grab a water here if I can make it without falling over. Okay, what else we got?
Skeletal remains found on the island. And if so, what do they tell about the cause of death of these individuals? How old were they?
Yes, there's lots of skeletal material, and this is now a new area of research, and a lot of the skeletal material has been moved to Chilean museums. So they're working on these skeletons, which predate the Europeans getting there. And this is controversial. I have a section about this in the paper because it's brand new. I added this within 6 months of finishing the manuscript. Well, I had finished it. I had to add more, and late getting to the publisher because I kept adding stuff because papers kept coming out. And there's controversy about this because, we're doing the DNA of these allegedly Rapa Nuians, or Rapa Nui is the proper way to say it. So why do we find European genes in some skeletons? And so that's thought to be contamination, or is it interbreeding from Chileans who came there after, the Europeans started moving around? So picking out what you're studying is hard to do. You don't know if it's been contaminated. but there are plenty of skeletons that are completely Rapa Nui. But you're not, the people there today, it's almost impossible to say anybody is pure Rapa Nui. Because Chile took this over, well, decades ago and made it a state of Chile or a province. And Europeans arrived in 1772, I think it was the first Europeans to get there. And so, you know, people being what they are, there has been interbreeding, and how much of that is spread around. And so that many generations from 1772 to today, there's almost certainly no purebred Rapa Nui. Yeah.
First of all, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Is there any suggestion that these pulses of exploration were related to changes in climate?
Yes, there are. We have a person, a geographer at Ohio State. Geez, now I'd have to look in my book to get the reference. I have 3 or 4 of his papers, and he goes on about warming seas and changing currents and time it takes to move from here to there, and how the Polynesians moving around were actually able to move against the current as their sailing abilities increased. That the old view prior to Heyerdahl and everybody else, the old view was that, oh, the Polynesians were just rafting around. They couldn't control where they were going. They were pushed by currents here and there. And that really isn't true. Polynesians had destinations in mind. They sailed against the wind. Their skills were great. But there's also the thought that they also could wait out the prevailing currents, the southern oscillations. It's going to change. El Nino is going to come in, and if you wait long enough, instead of flowing to the west, it's going to flow to the east. And you could do things like that. And of course, that's all related to climate and so forth. So there are people working on that, and we have them in geography at Ohio State.
Pause between, thank you. You said there's a 1400-year pause between getting to you've given it the names, the outer area of
Yes,
and then moving on. Do we have any idea? Have people theorized, thought about why they moved on? Was it simply that they had now the technology? Did they know there were islands out there?
They couldn't have known. No, they couldn't
Yeah.
have known. But during that time, their culture evolved. They developed more and more things. They learned more about navigation. They wanted to go further and further. What's up? Well, to go further, you got to build a bigger canoe. They built the biggest canoe. They built the.
So this is the human tendency to want to explore,
Yeah,
right?
they had no clue that there was Tahiti out there. You know, it's amazing, and that's why this is the last human diaspora. New Zealand, 800 years ago. I mean, that's pretty remarkable when you think about 800 years ago, the year 1200. Well, University of Paris was just starting up. The oldest pub in Britain had been serving beer for 400 years, and here New Zealand was just getting people. I mean, I think that's very cool.
And
You know.
people just launched out. Were they expecting to come back? Or did you just launch out figuring you were going to find something and you
Well,
never return?
no, not necessarily that. Well, maybe, yes, thinking we might find something, but they're not. I mean, these are Homo sapiens. They're bright. They had their food. They had their water. Bamboo shafts filled with fresh water. So if you're gone a certain amount of time and half your food is gone, and you think, well, bloody hell, where am I going to make it any further? We could turn around and go back and wait for a different time of year when the current may be different. Or they could keep going and take a chance. Who knows? I mean, it would really be great to be able to look down on all this and see what's going on. But science does what it can do, looking at evidence. And, you know, you'll learn what you can, and science is self-correcting. And as, you know, I've written a book about evolution and the myth of creationism. And it's so much better to figure things out than make things up. You know, that's the difference. That's what science does. We figure things out. We don't always get it right at first, but we're self-correcting. Okay, you had enough? Books for sale in the back, and I want to sign them for you. You're number one.